Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Jacob podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Rova. I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Jacob Hare. And today we are very lucky to be joined by the Trailblazers former analytics manager, as well as the 76ers former vice president of basketball strategy, and now the current head basketball coach for the boys varsity basketball team at the Jack and Barrackville Academy, Ben Falk. Ben, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get right into the question. So first, pretty simple question. How did where did your love for basketball begin, and how did you get into basketball?
I love this. It's a good question. Taking me back. I think that when I was young, I was always interested in sports. And I liked all different sports. And there was just something about basketball that I just really felt a pull. And I think part of it was even, watching Michael Jordan and understanding this idea of you could have someone where you just kind of put your mind to it, and just through work ethic and determination, one person could make a huge difference on the game. But at the same time, it's also still a team game. And so you have to navigate those dynamics between how does one individual do what they're doing versus, trade off for the team, sacrifice for the team. And so it just was, I don't know, it was a very interesting sport and I loved playing it. And I spent, tons and tons of time just shooting around and playing and whatever. And, as I got older and older, I just felt more and more drawn to basketball relative to all the other sports.
Did you always envision yourself in an analytics role in the game of basketball?
Not really. I think it's funny because that wasn't really a thing with me growing up. It's probably interesting for you guys, it's just kind of a different era. So for you, it's just always been, part of the world. But if you think about it, Moneyball came out in 2003, I think 2002 or 2003. And that kind of touched off, that was just the beginning of this kind of revolution in sports, and it started in baseball. And so 2002, 2003, I was 14, 15 years old. So I was already in high school at that point, basically. And so I think I was always interested. There still was fantasy sports, and I always loved fantasy sports, and I kind of got into it that way. But it wasn't like, oh, this is a career that I can have. I just love sports. And so as everything, as I kept going through my high school career, one of the things that I did was just, I love fantasy basketball. So I tried to make my own fantasy basketball game, and that involved learning how to program and learning how to gather stats and learning how to analyze stats. And that's kind of what took me down that path. So I was just, self-taught in that way. And yeah, so I started to learn those skills and apply those skills. I found a discussion group and forums where there were people who were interested in basketball analytics, who were having these discussions out in the open. Because it was so new, they weren't all hired by teams yet. So they were just having them out in the open, and I could participate and I could learn. And that's kind of what really got me my start. It wasn't that I was aiming for this career. And even throughout, even once I started volunteering for teams or working for teams through college, I was always like, this can't actually be real. I need to have a plan B, right? I need to have to know what actually could happen. And so, the fact that it worked out is just, looking back, it was such a surprise to me. It was never kind of the plan. It was like, I'll do this for fun and we'll hope it works out.
Yes, that's a good lead into our next question. How did you get your first job in the NBA?
So that was kind of the story. Was I had stumbled on this message board because I was trying to make a better fantasy basketball game. It wasn't, anything where I was trying to get a job. Because again, at the time, that wasn't it wasn't. In my mind, I was like, oh, this would be amazing if I could get a job in the NBA, but there wasn't an obvious path for someone like me to do that. So I just was kind of following, this road that I had, laid out in terms of fantasy sports. I was just trying to make the best game that I could because it would be fun for me. And that led me to finding this message board where there were all these kind of the leaders of basketball analytics were discussing these things. And so for a few years, I learned and then started, once I had my own information and my own analysis that I could contribute, I started contributing a little bit. And then when I believe it was my freshman year of college, by that time, a few of them had been hired by NBA teams. And so one of them, who was working for an NBA team, Dean Oliver, he kind of just posted on, like, I'm looking for interns. And so when I saw that, I immediately jumped on it. I was like, oh, so I sent him a message. I said, I'll be your intern. And he's like, I can't pay you. And I was like, that's okay. Like, I'm still in school. I'll just work, for free. I'll do what I can. And so I volunteered for him basically, I think for like a year and a half. And this was, one of the things that was really, I think if I recall, I started during the school year, but, one of the things that was nice was my parents at first were like, well, you should get a real job during the summer. Like, you're not being paid anything. I was just volunteering remotely. So I was just in my room, working on my computer, and they thought about it. And then they were like, you know what? We think this is at least legitimate. And so, they let me do it, which was obviously, a big break. So I volunteered, a little bit at the end of that. I think that was my freshman year of college. And then through that summer, and then through the rest of the next year, just continuing. It was really at the end of that summer where Dean said, you know, okay, this has been great. Like, good job, good work on the summer. And I said, well, I'll keep going. He's like, well, don't you have schoolwork? And I said, I'll just keep doing it around school, because to me, my foot was in the door, and I wasn't going to just kind of give that away and be like, and so, in my mind, obviously schoolwork was important, but it also was gaining these skills and kind of being in this world. And so I juggled both. I think for most of that next year, I can't remember what happened that next summer, but then by the beginning of, in fact, actually by that next summer, Dean had told me that he had a few teams reaching out to him looking for people, and he had given them my name, and that all fell through, and I was a little bit discouraged. But then in the fall of, I want to say 2008, so that was the beginning of my junior year. That was when the Trailblazers reached out to him, and he said, "Are you interested? You'll be during your school year." And I said, "Yeah, like, again, it's the same kind of thing. I would love to have this opportunity." And so, unlike the other teams that had reached out to him, the Blazers were kind of the next day called me, and I interviewed with them, and that's how I got a part-time job, with the Blazers, even while I was still in school, for my last 2 years of school.
What was your biggest takeaway from your internship?
That's a great question. I think, um, one of the things I did, he kind of let me just explore what I was interested in. Um, and we talked about defense and how you measure defense. And um, there wasn't good data at the time for that. There's still, it's hard unless you have some access to some of the proprietary data. It's very hard to measure defense in any way. And so what I did was I watched lots of games and I charted lots of stats. And I think my big takeaway from that was just having the experience to go from what is happening on the court and how to turn that into numbers, and then how to analyze those numbers is really important, because I think too often when people do statistical analysis, they start with the stats that they have, and those stats have lots of weaknesses. They don't always capture exactly what's going on. You're kind of chained to what those stats were. And if you kind of take a step back and start from what's actually happening in the game, you can see the game very differently. You understand the stats very differently. And it just really helps you, have just a higher level of analysis in that way. And so throughout my career, even, the takeaway for me has always been everything you do needs to be connected to video or to connected to the game in some way. And so I've been a huge believer in film, and, still watch tons and tons of basketball. And I think, like, instead of just one specific lesson, like, that was a big lesson that applied to my whole career.
So, how did you go from the Trailblazers to the Sixers, and walk us through your role with the Sixers?
Yeah, so right, the story I was telling, right? I was part-time for the Blazers for my last 2 years of college, and when I graduated, they hired me full-time, and I worked there for 4 years. And that was an incredible experience, and I learned a ton. And then, Sam Hinkie had been hired by the Sixers in 2013, and when my contract expired at the end of 2014, um, he was interested in hiring me. We had connected at the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, over the years. And, had just kind of stayed in touch and sent back and forth book recommendations and things like that. And so when that was an opportunity, it was something that was very interesting to me, in particular because I'm from the East Coast. I'm from the DC suburbs, and so to be able to come back to the East Coast and be near family, that was really important to me. And and then obviously the opportunity with Sam, and the chance to build something in Philadelphia. Um, I wasn't that familiar with Philadelphia sports at the time, but then coming here, talking to people, and understanding just how passionate the fan base is, and also how there hadn't really been any great Sixers teams since Allen Iverson, and just people telling me stories of what the city was like, what during that run to the finals, and how just the whole city was electric about the Sixers, and the opportunity to try to build something like that again was really enticing. So then when I came to the Sixers, my role was the vice president of basketball strategy, which was essentially, we did a lot of things, right? So, I the way that I define it to people is I helped us make basketball decisions however I could. So whether it's thinking through scouting process, or doing some scouting myself, or helped run the analytics department, we worked with the coaching staff a little bit, but just wherever it seemed like there was an opportunity for me to help us make better decisions, improve process, however it was, that's kind of what I focused on.
So how did you go from the NBA to coaching high school basketball?
Yeah, so then Sam Hinkie, he left the Sixers in the spring of 2016. And then I left shortly thereafter, and it was a period where it was like, well, what do I do now? And I think for a lot of people in the NBA, it's a career, and so you kind of take your time and you find the next best opportunity, and you go on to another team and you keep going. For me, I had always thought to myself that maybe this wasn't the only thing I wanted to do for my life. And so it became an opportunity to think and explore what else there was to do. I mean, there's also the fact that, like I was saying before, Philadelphia is a place I really like to live. And, the East Coast is home for me. And so I wasn't eager to pick up and move somewhere else. And so having the opportunity to step back and think about what else I wanted to do, there were a lot of different opportunities. And, one of the things I had been thinking about for years was that it would be like really fun and really fulfilling to be able to coach high school basketball, and to apply some of the things that I had learned to my own program, and just to be able to like teach the game and share this game that, like you guys asked great questions to start, which was when did I start loving basketball? I don't know where it came from, but I've loved this sport my whole life. And it's just incredible to be able to share it and teach it and be around it. And so that was something I always knew I wanted to try. And so when I left the Sixers, I, kind of looked around at different schools that I could work at. And in my mind, I mean, so because I'm Orthodox and observe Shabbat, that limited the pool, right? Because a lot of, any non-Jewish schools, there's going to be practices and games during times that I couldn't attend. And so, I reached out to the different Jewish schools and talked to Barrack. I had some friends in Philly who had gone to Barrack and were like, oh, you gotta talk to Barrack. So, so I reached out to Justin, the athletic director, and volunteered as the assistant coach for that season.
That's awesome. So, would you consider a possible return to the NBA? And if so, would you possibly take up a coaching role?
So it's funny, people always ask me that, because I think what I was saying earlier, that it's kind of atypical to start in an NBA career and then just kind of leave. So, I mean, I always say is never say never. I mean, at this point, I think when you're younger and you think you have like a path for your life, you think that, oh, I'm going this direction. This is the way that it always goes. And, as I've gotten older, I've realized that there's lots of things that pop up and change your path, and it's worthwhile to be able to go with the flow and change direction when it seems to need that. And so for me, this is the path I'm on right now. I don't know if that will ever change. It might. So, we'll see what happens. I'll never say that it's not, it's not going to happen. But at the same time, this experience outside the NBA has also been incredible. Coaching has been incredible. And, running my business and doing all this kind of stuff has been incredible. So, um, that's not something that I'm necessarily actively pursuing now, but you never know. And yeah, I mean, I think the coaching side of it is very interesting to me. And I think I've learned a lot, even from the time that I've spent at Barrack that could be applied to other future coaching roles. Um, that said, there's still that challenge of what I just brought up, which is coaching in the NBA. It doesn't stop for Friday night, Saturday, right? Like there's practices, there's travel, there's games. And so, from that perspective, it would need a team that's accommodating for that.
So you brought a championship to Barrack for the first time in a long time. What was it like bringing the championship back to Barrack?
So I'll say, it's very, very exciting, and it was an incredible experience. I don't think of it as like, bringing a championship back. Obviously, it was a team effort.
Yeah.
That we all accomplished something really, really great. And I think what to me was really incredible was that we kind of set our sights on it from the beginning of the season.
Mhm.
And had been thinking that whole off season, like, this team, like, we have a chance to do something special. It's a really great group. And but being fairly new to coaching high school basketball, it was hard to put it in context to know, okay, is this the kind of team that comes along once every decade? Is it the kind of team that's just like, oh, every few years you have a team like this? And so, I talked to the team before the year about what our goals were, and I thought that we really did have a chance to win the championship, a really good chance. And then to see the buy-in from everyone, to understand what we could do and what it would mean to the school and what it would mean to all of us, was really incredible. And so, the players really deserve, all the credit to have bought in. And one thing from the beginning that we talked about is that it would involve sacrifice from everyone. And that goes back to what I said kind of at the beginning. That's the thing about basketball. Like, individuals make a difference, but you only really accomplish what you need to accomplish as a team. And so that means, from everyone, from the player who played the most minutes to the player who played the least, just kind of coming together as a group. And, especially for our seniors who, it's an opportunity to say, oh, I'm going to score the most points. I'm going to get, I'm going to do this or that. But they really were an incredible group, a unit that played well together and fit perfectly. And so, that was just an incredible experience to see the team come together. And, win or lose, you would like to say, like, that experience would have been amazing because the season that we had was incredible. The runs that we went on, the fact that we lost one game all year, it meant a lot. Obviously, the way sports works, it would feel slightly less good if we hadn't actually won the championship. So then to kind of cap off that season and to validate everything that we did, everything that the players did, was really, that part is really special. And then I told them after the game, I said, this is the kind of thing that you'll remember for the rest of your life. Like, we'll all remember it for the rest of our lives. And that to me is it's truly special. So, for to have the community and the school very excited. I told you too, what's very funny is I have friends who went to Barrack, and I have friends who were on the last championship team in the late 90s. And so we would always talk about it and joke about it and say, like, it would be great if we could have bring that championship back, like you were saying. And so to understand kind of the way that the community is for the school, where it really is, such a community, and people really, the alumni really, associate themselves with the school and love the school. And so that, I think, was also a very cool aspect of, being able to have that championship. And so, to talk to those players and people who went to the school and to see their perspective years later of what it was like to be part of the team, to be part of a championship team, that also gave me perspective to understand that this is something that, all the players, everyone involved, is really going to remember this for a very long time.
Well, Ben, thank you so much. Before we let you go, we have one final question. What's your very early NBA Finals prediction for this season?
That is a tough one. I don't know how to answer that. I'm sorry. I'm gonna be not fun and just say this year is as uncertain a year as we've had. And so, I think everyone has said it's kind of a little bit of a boring answer. The Lakers won it last year. They seem to be as good or better this year. There's no reason to think that they shouldn't be the favorites. But it's only going to take one random test or, one injury, one thing that kind of throws it all off. So it's just more up in the air than it ever has been.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. These are great questions.